Hello everyone, Michael Lee Parker. Today, we're going to talk about a very, very important topic, and that is the topic of courage. How do we develop courage? How do we actually begin to grow in courage? We've learned about fear. We know fear is paralyzing, but how do we develop this hero to combat that fear? And so this is a very, very important topic because courage is something that is often misunderstood and one of the least things that you can get any information about how to develop. So when we think about the word courage, one of the things that is very important when we think about this word, we think about words like brave. We think about words like valor. And all of these words are words that make you think about people that are able to stand up to things, right? Able to deal with things. And I want you to understand that when we're dealing with courage, you really cannot deal with courage until you can identify opposition. So opposition and courage go together. I've got to have something to be courageous about. So one of the first things in dealing with courage is we have to know how many different things are opposing us. What are the things that are in our way? So it could be things that are personal, right? It could be an opposition to my health. It could be an opposition to my peace in life. It could be an opposition to my career. It could be something that's opposing me in something that I want to achieve in my life. And so before we can even get to courage, we have to identify the opposition. So, for example, when we think about, let's just say this is you, right? And you have a goal, whatever that goal might be. When we start to see opposition get in the way, right? Let's just say this is opposition, a wall of opposition that begins to get in our way. Now, normally, when we have a wall of opposition, this opposition sends feelings of fear to us because our first reaction to seeing opposition is the feeling of fear. So we have to deal with this, right? We have to deal with this issue of fear. Now, one of the things that's very important with this is there's a decision that needs to be made. Am I going to allow this fear to cause me not to move forward? Or is there going to be some courage that sees myself going past that opposition, right? And being able to get to my goal. So when you think about this battle that begins to take place, and we're dealing with the fear that's coming from the opposition, and first the courage, because again, remember, both fear and courage are not tangible things that you can grab and touch, right? So you can't say, fear came and grabbed me by the hand and held me down so I couldn't move anywhere, right? It's a feeling, it's a thought process, it's an emotion, right? The same thing with courage though. Courage is just the same. Before I can even do anything, courage is something that fills me up on the inside, that helps me to understand that it is possible to defeat the opposition, to rise over that wall of opposition. So we must understand that. Now, one of the things that we also want to understand in this process, so now that we see that opposition can bring fear, and that we have to decide if we have enough courage to overcome that fear and get over that wall of opposition. Another thing that we want to understand about courage is that you really have to develop courage by taking real situations and really one by one starting to deal with how you feel from a fear perspective and taking a step within that fear. So this is how courage is starting to be developed, is when I feel fear, it's actually being able to move while in that fear. Doesn't mean the fear went away, but as I begin to take steps within that fear, something is actually beginning to develop within me, and a courage is being able is beginning to grow. So right while I'm surrounded by fear, So I'm surrounded by fear, but within this fear, there's actually stepping stones, right? And there's a point where I actually get out of the fear. So while I'm in fear, courage doesn't just come and wipe the fear away, but courage is something that says, I know I can take one step. That one step might be, I'm afraid if I go here that this is going to happen, that's going to happen. The first step is I'm going to get dressed, right? It's courage just to get dressed. The next step is I'm gonna actually get the directions to where I need to go. Every time you take that step, there is something being created, right? And so what is happening is each one of these steps is building and your courage is growing, right? Now, another part of this courage as I start to take these steps. So one of the things that begins to increase your courage is the willingness to start getting to the point where you can accept the outcome of your demonstration of courage. So, for example, if you had an opposition and you were trying to, let's say you play tennis and there's someone you don't feel that you can compete with in tennis. And so you have opposition, you have fear, but you go ahead and you play that tennis match and you give it your best, right? And so first you actually had to show up. You had to get your racket. You had to get dressed. You had to start the game. You had to really start to really do your best within that game. But let's say you lost the game. So a part of developing courage is the acceptance of when you demonstrated courage, that did not stop you from actually seeing the value in the courage that was created. So courage is not something that is the outcome. It's the pursuit of the outcome. It's the means to the end. So that means that courage is not a failure, because I won because I showed the courage to demonstrate my effort. So don't confuse the two. So these stairways of courage, right? If I get to the end of this and maybe my goal was not complete, the key is that courage took steps through fear to make the best effort. And this is how you start to develop an aptitude and an ability to have courage in different situations. Now, remember this, because you have courage, it doesn't mean you're going to always get or do or become what you want overnight. But what we're trying to do is get something within that can at least try to do that. Because if you don't have courage, fear will literally paralyze you and you can't even take a step or make an effort to get past opposition. So opposition always wins. So think about that. To live a life where opposition always wins. But if you have courage, this means that opposition will always have a problem with you, right? The game is never over when someone stands in front of you or when a situation comes up. It's never over because you're a courageous person. And so when you learn how to have courageous behavior, that means that now I know how to not be afraid to take steps while I'm afraid. And then when I take those steps, to be okay with whatever outcome, because the courage is in the steps. It's not so much in the destination. Now, I want to bring up another element about courage. So when you think about situations, right? So let's call this situation number one. It's a situation number two. We got situation number three. So each of these situations, when you consider yourself, there might be one situation that sends this amount of fear, but another situation sends this amount of fear, and another situation sends this amount of fear. So when you think about different situations, the point is every situation is different. So make sure that you realize when you're thinking about all of the different aspects of courage, courage is not a one-time thing where you can say, I have courage, right? No matter what, I have courage. We have to understand that we also have to be situational with our courage. Because, again, imagine the danger of driving on the freeway every single day. You could die. But because if you have a car and you drive, you've done it before. And so you have courage that you can overcome the opposition of traffic, the opposition of, someone out there who can't drive, even though there is a risk. There could be people out there drunk driving. There could be all kind of stuff going on. But you have the courage to do that because you're familiar with that situation. And you had to start one day. You went to driver's school. You had to begin, right? So today it seems like no big deal. But everything you do now that you don't even think twice about. And if someone say, hey, there's opposition, and you say, I do that every day, it doesn't bother me. Well, you didn't start off that way. Everything that we have today is a situation we first had to learn and get exposed to and then get comfortable. So we have to understand with each of these situations, we have to be able to evaluate how is each situation affecting me and how do I have situational courage. So being aware that every situation might be something that I need to first create some familiarity. So I have to be able to say, hey, I'm not familiar with this situation. So for me to get on the path toward courage, let me get more familiar with it. Sometimes it's getting more information. Sometimes it's asking questions. Don't be afraid to talk to someone who's done it before. Your courage will increase with familiarity. The other thing is we can get information. So the more information we get, right, even when you get informed, then again, the courage begins to rise up. Sometimes maybe there's opposition that you don't understand anything about. You don't know what to expect. But as soon as you start getting little pieces of information, you say, hey, I think I could deal with that. I think I could handle that. But the information is very important. Familiarity and then information. Then you have to get experience. Now, this is the tough part. If I want to build this situational courage, I've got to put myself in situations where I get an experience with that situation. So this is where I have to take a step. I have to get involved. I can't just be familiar and get information now. I've got to start experiencing it by trying. And now that courage can begin to develop. Now, keep in mind, some situations you already have the courage. Right? It's not something you need to develop. But there's these other situations that come up that we just say, I just don't feel like I have the courage to face this. I don't feel like I have what it takes to do this. And that's when you need to start being willing to go through that process and understand that when you take those steps, when you get more familiar, when you get the right information, and then you start to take experiences, real experiences on, you'll start to see that courage beginning to develop. Now, the last thing that I want to leave with you is that courage and fear, they can't actually, in the end, one is going to begin to drive out the other. So there's this challenge between courage and fear that I want you to understand. Now, in this pie diagram, fear is never gone. There's always a little something there. Now, I do, even in speaking and even as I've trained, I've done, but you always got that little something there that's concerned. You want to make sure things go right. And, sometimes fear is healthy. Fear can keep you alive. There's some people who should have had some fear. And so, it would have been better for them to understand a healthy fear. But see, we're talking about opposition that's in our way of success. We're not talking about common sense. We're not talking about, doing something you shouldn't do and saying, I have courage. We're talking about when there's things that we really need to conquer so that we can get to that goal. We can get to that success. And because of that, we have to begin to evaluate what is this pie for us? How much fear versus how much courage? And can I widen the pie of courage so that fear is less and so that now I'm able to move? Because if this fear is too great, it leads to paralysis. If the courage is greater, it'll lead to action. So we have that whole battle between paralysis and action. And when we take action, the courage grows. And so the more action we take, the more that courage can grow. So These are some really good insights to keep in mind. One more thing that I want to tell you about this is when you're on the pursuit of courage, don't be discouraged when you display courage and you try. And sometimes there's things that come up and challenges and things that happen. That is okay. Make sure that you keep on going, because in the end, when you have a challenge while trying to be courageous, the mind and the brain will latch onto that to try to increase your fear. So what you got to do is when you're trying to be courageous and you run into a challenge, don't let one point of challenge turn into a big bundle of emotion that leads to you being paralyzed. Look at that situation for what it is. Understand it, learn from it, and keep moving forward and increasing your courage.